Ekpa at best is a pawn. At best is being used and doesn't even understand it. He doesn't strike me as a particularly bright person. I actually think Nnamdi Kanu is a much more dangerous political secessionist than Simon Ekpa. So I wouldn't be worried about him. What I'll be worried about is that the funding uh, pipeline that has somehow very curiously managed to shower Simon Ekpa and his people with hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars. I'd be very interested in knowing where that funding is coming from. Because even if Simon Ekpa disappears off the face of the planet tomorrow, that funding is still there. And it's going to find someone else and anoint that person as a new, and that person might be a more dangerous person. So um, I think they're foreign entities that are actively seeking to instigate crises that would lead to the not just the disintegration of Nigeria, but the violent disintegration of Nigeria. I think there are people who are actively working toward that. As I've said multiple times, even though personally I would very much prefer for Nigeria to remain one country, I think it's in Africa's best interest for Africa to have powerful, geographically large nation states. I think that's what's in Africa's best interest. However, if Nigeria were to break up because the people in Nigeria simply cannot find a way to get along and live together in any, acceptable manner, then so be it. But the issue is not so much the breakup, the issue is the manner of the breakup. Um, I would hope that if a breakup happens, that it's a negotiated breakup, something similar to the negotiations that led to the carving out of South Sudan, out of Sudan. Even though, yes, there was a war that came before that, but I'm saying the actual negotiation itself, there was a process involving the UN and all whatnot. So if that were to happen, if a breakup, which I don't want to happen really under any circumstances, but if a breakup absolutely had to happen, I would very much prefer that it were to be a negotiated breakup. Because if it were to be a violent disintegration, nobody's really going to survive it and nobody's going to recover from it. So even the new countries that would arise out of it, they wouldn't be able to recover from the mess that would that would arise from a violent disintegration. And the reason I say that is I don't think a lot of people understand. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about people not understanding that Nigeria is part of the world and Nigeria exists in a geopolitical context that is bigger than Nigeria. So a lot of people don't realize that some of the world's most abundant energy reserves that we don't even know, that we aren't even aware of, are buried under our feet in Nigeria. So the so-called Anambra Basin, for example, which covers parts of Imo, Ebonyi, and Anambra, is estimated to hold something like 30 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. And to put that in perspective, the world's largest known reserves of natural gas currently are in Russia, which has about 40 trillion cubic feet. So that would put a region of Nigeria at number two globally. That's not the whole of Nigeria, that's a region of Nigeria at number two globally. Nigeria has so many other resources that most people aren't even aware of. So all the usual things, your coal, your iron ore, all this, obviously. But apart from those things, even things like nuclear fuel, uranium, Nigeria has these things. It's just that it's not, as we say, they're not allowed that. So if a violent disintegration is allowed to happen, with the number of global actors that are just circling around constantly looking for a way to sink their claws into, Nigeria is basically going to become Eastern DRC, or rather, what is left of Nigeria will become Eastern DRC, which is basically an everlasting civil war. And what's then going to happen is that if six countries emerge violently from what used to be known as Nigeria, within 2 3 years, those six countries will start having their own internal secession movements because those same foreign interests they're not going to leave you alone simply because Nigeria is over. They're going to keep on fomenting that chaos. And unfortunately, even in the example that I mentioned, which is that of South Sudan, we have seen instances of this where, for no apparent reason, it just seems almost impossible for the South Sudanese to live at peace with each other. They're always fighting one civil war or the other. They don't have 5 unbroken years of peace and development. It just hasn't happened, right? So there is a puppet master behind the scenes, and it's very important for Nigerians to understand this, that Nigeria is not an island hanging in the air somewhere. that Nigeria is part of global geopolitics, and there are people who have an interest in sinking their teeth into Nigeria and not for the benefit of anybody in Nigeria. So, regardless of how much we do not like ourselves, and I know we don't like ourselves, but the fact is we don't have to like ourselves. We just have to find a way to coexist because the alternative can always be worse.